If you want to support the channel, please consider becoming a member today. Members get early access to videos, access to all the stream VODs, and exclusive access to emotes as well. So if you'd like to support the channel, become a member today. Ben Shapiro debated Alex O'Connor, formerly known as Cosmic Skeptic, and I have really not seen any of this debate, and I've been really wanting to. So there are actually two clips here of this debate. Ben Shapiro debates Atheist on slavery in the Bible, which is a favorite subject of mine. Very curious to see what Shapiro would say about this. And then a clip uploaded by Ben Shapiro, who decides what is evil. I feel like that might be kind of predictable. Like I feel like I could see where that's going to go, but maybe I'm wrong. We'll start with the clip uploaded on Alex O'Connor's channel because I'm really curious about the slavery thing.
That there are some things within religious scripture that do need to be taken seriously and do need to be taken essentially at face value. That is some of the very specific legalistic commandments of the Old Testament, for example, or of the Hebrew Bible, I should say. These are not, when people list these and say that these are potentially morally problematic and may have done something towards hindering, for example, like I mentioned earlier, the abolition of slavery in the United States. Of course, there was a great deal of religious influence on both sides, which is something that I've already mentioned. But don't you think that this problem could have been solved a lot more easily if there had been a stronger...
Alex is right, by the way. That's true. There were some sects of Christianity that were fighting against slavery, but there was also a large portion of Christians and Christian doctrine and whatnot that was advocating for slavery. In fact, they would use Bible verses, specifically Bible verses in the Old Testament, to justify slavery.
A religious tradition of opposition to the ownership of other human beings. Why can't that have been the case?
Okay,
because Scripture quite explicitly condones it.
Right,
and in fact gives you the details of how to do
yes,
it.
So
that's something that couldn't have been done, in other words, because you've taken
now I guess you tell me to gloss. So
this moral principle that's placed outside of meaningful debate.
Right.
Before we move on, can I ask, where are we getting these buttons from? Are they from Amazon? You know, you press one and everyone's an atheist.
There's this wonderful thing
Are these available on the market?
That I think you both need to use in this conversation, which is...
I instantly dislike the host. Don't try to throw a little joke in here, okay? Shapiro was just asked a good question. Don't start asking about the buttons.
So let's as far as why didn't the Bible prescribe the perfect world as I would see it or as you might see it?
He also noted that I am
the answer is
ape,
because
and I should go F
two
myself.
reasons. One, as stated right up top, I'm not God. I assume he has different logic than I do. Two, the Bible.
Okay, so Shapiro gave the instant cop-out. He's God, I just assume he has better logic than me? I guess I just need to understand how the better logic can somehow lead to a conclusion that slavery in some contexts is actually okay. How can an infinite logic lead to a conclusion that says, actually it is okay to use human beings as property? How is that God logic, and how are you content just assuming that, well, God's logic must be so much bigger and better than mine that somehow he actually logically came to the conclusion that slavery is not that bad, and that if you beat the fuck out of your slave, as long as they don't die, then you're good to go?
The Bible is in an inherently problematic position in the sense that, on the one hand, it's trying to divulge important truths for all time. At the same time, it's talking to a people of a particular time.
Yes.
And this is a well-worn tradition inside Judaism. So to take the slavery example, there is no mandate to hold slaves in the Bible. Right? There are lots of mandates in the Bible. Many, many mandates. There are 613 of them according to my religion, right? That's why I do all these weird things that I do. But one of those mandates is not to hold slaves. Right? And so the idea of there was a society that existed at the time of the Bible in which slaveholding was not only ubiquitous, it was universal.
Murder was also pretty universal, right? Like, didn't humans kind of universally murder other humans? That was also something that was just ubiquitous. Among all humans, people were just kind of doing it. But God had no problem saying, hey, don't do that, okay? But then it's like, well, owning other people's property, beating the shit out of them, and as long as, you don't kill them, LOL, and, giving them like a wife and kids so that they are trapped to their master, so that even if a slave is eventually set free, now the wife and the children belong to the master, so he has to choose between his freedom and abandoning his family or not. Make it make sense.
And could be justified not just in terms of religious scripture, but in terms of Aristotelian thought.
Like, why would God need that to be why couldn't he just say no to that as well?
Right? I mean,
Yes,
the great philosophers we like to cite sometimes in the secular tradition are big fans of slavery. And that's true virtually up until the 18th century.
Yes.
This is just a caveat. Who cares if the great philosophers came to the similar conclusions or were big fans of slavery, allegedly? You're comparing philosophers to God. I thought he's God. I thought he has the infinite knowledge. You just said you assume God has the infinite knowledge, but now you're also being like, well, like the great philosophers were big fans of slavery. I don't care if they were fans of slavery. They're not supposed to be an all-knowing, all-moral God.
So the idea would be, is this verse attempting to woo people away from a tradition of slavery or to humanize the slaves? Or is it attempting to reinforce that?
If the master beats his slave and the slave does not die as a direct result, then the master shall not be punished. That is a verse in Exodus. If you don't believe me, you can go and look it up yourself, okay?
Or is it attempting to reinforce that by making it harsher and more difficult? And that's why actually one of the things I enjoy doing in terms of how I study the Bible, for example, is I like to look at contemporaneous religious texts of the time. So I like to study the Bible alongside, for example, Hammurabi's Code. And it's really interesting to notice the differences and where the Bible is liberalizing Hammurabi's Code, for example.
Absolutely.
And so the idea that a divine revelation has to be given to human beings who are capable of following that in the time. Again, that's part of the difficulty of I think rebutting religion in a certain sense, because again, it seems wiggly, but it really isn't, in the sense that if you believe, as I do, in a God who spoke to human beings in some form or fashion and has to speak to them on a level that they can understand, in ways they can understand, then that immediately is going to discount the ability to do a lot of very radical things that would have appeared radical in 1200 BC, but now appear to be commonplace for us.
Yes, I understand this argument, and I've heard it many times. I must say that it seems strange to me that God does seem willing to completely and utterly condemn a bunch of other practices, including, by the way, imaginary crimes like witchcraft, just done away with entirely. And even if it is the case that God, for some reason, couldn't even hint at the idea.
This is such an excellent point, and it's very similar to the same exact kind of argument that I make, because it's such a good point. Why was God okay saying no, just a hard no, to all these things? And then when it came to slavery, he was like, well, tee-hee.
That maybe eventually we should be moving towards the abolition of the idea of owning human beings as private property. He just had to
hinted at it, but yes.
I still think it's the case that he would not permit a flat immorality, and I think you would agree with that too. And so when I open the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible, and when I look at the texts saying that if you lay siege to a city, you can kill, if the Lord delivers it into your hand, you can kill the men and the women, or you can kill the men and keep the women and the children and the livestock as plunder, as Deuteronomy says. And in the very next verse, the very next chapter says that, if you see a good-looking woman, and I'm not interjecting that. If somebody finds an attractive woman,
yes, if Fatawar is the actual Hebrew, yeah,
then they can take them for themselves, and if they want them as their wives, and they take them home, they shave their head, they cut off their fingernails, they give them 30 days to mourn their old husband, who you may very well have just killed.
This is all true, by the way. I've read this verse myself in the Bible. Everything he's saying here is completely accurate.
And then you can take them as your wife. When Numbers 31 has Moses instruct the slaughter of the Midianites, saying, kill all the men, and this time the women get killed too, but not the women who haven't slept with a man. And why might that be? And it says that, keep them for yourselves. And
yeah,
I hear all
that's
this.
So true. And that's the kind of thing. These are the type of questions that need to be asked to Christians more often, because this also demonstrates the cognitive dissonance where they believe in an all-knowing, all-loving, all-moral God who simultaneously is saying that, hey, if you see a girl who's a virgin, yeah, it's fine. You can just keep her as your property. She can be your little doll, basically. How can Christians believe in a all-moral God and also believe that the word is necessarily literal, because many Christians do, at least for those Christians, I would be curious. How do they believe that God, who is all moral, is also advocating for things that are so clearly and abundantly immoral?
time that this is some kind of liberalizing process. Maybe it's because, you know, these people wouldn't survive on their own. It's some kind of protective measure to make sure that you're looking after them. If that's the case, then why does it only apply to the virgins? That seems a little bit suspect to me. You know, it's sort of Scripture is littered with these kinds of
Well, again, so to go back to the sort of oral tradition nature,
and I don't think God
would
would permit a proactive immorality, even if he can't, for some reason, abolish the practice altogether. If you see what I'm saying.
Well, no, that last point I don't see. So when you say even if he can't abolish the practice altogether, well,
which already
no,
I think he would be able to do.
Right. So the question is whether he can or whether he can't. If he can't abolish the practice, then the idea of wooing people away from a particular type of sin through a gradualistic process is known throughout societies across human history. I mean, the gradualistic processes are the way that most things get.
So God can do everything except get rid of slavery. Bravo. All right.
Done across human history. And by the way, the universal practice, unfortunately, up till today in many places in the world, is in fact the extreme version of what you're talking about.
This is a cop-out and a caveat that literally has nothing to do with anything. Nobody's talking about whether or not slavery is a current thing going on or anything else. We're talking about Christianity and God specifically, God's role in literally saying it was okay to have slaves. That's what we're talking about. So every time you go, well, unfortunately, it's actually really commonplace still today, blah, 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 all you're doing is just caveating and deviating from the point until you can just scrounge up some kind of bullshit to just start spieling off again.
Everything, kill everyone. Right? That sort of stuff, unfortunately, does take place, even on planet Earth, even in the year 2023. And so the idea of a culture arising from the Bible that not only abolished slavery on its own shores, but then abolished slavery literally everywhere else, which is what Great Britain did. That, again, to separate that off from a tradition that also says that every human being is made in the image of God, right, which is the verse from Genesis, or that you have to treat the stranger well, right, which is repeated more than any injunction in the Bible, right? There are these traditions that are at war with each other inside the Bible, which is why there is this hotly fought kind of argument inside biblical circles about all of this stuff, which, again, is one of the reasons why I said right up top that when it gets to I can't just open the Bible and interpret the text as I would see fit. And say, well, I don't like this verse right here.
See, I find Shapiro's take interesting because I know that I'm talking generally about Christianity and specifically like Christians and their arguments. I recognize that Ben Shapiro is not a Christian. I know that. But doesn't Ben Shapiro still believe that in the God, at least of the Old Testament? And isn't that God of the Old Testament supposed to be all-knowing and all-moral?
I don't like this verse right here.
Contradictory?
What was that?
You say that Scripture is contradictory?
Well, I say that Scripture is, some Scripture is time-bound and some Scripture is not. So the easy one, the sort of easy way to distinguish is that when the Bible says not to do a thing, then that tends to be non-time-bound.
And when it says to do a thing?
And when it says to do a thing, that may be a temporary permission structure, but it could also be a wooing. And by the way, again, I'm not speaking out of turn here. This has been 1,500 years of Jewish reinterpretation of Esha Yifat, to take a quick example, right? The War Bride, the long-standing Talmudic tradition, which again is almost 2,000 years old at this point, is that was deliberately an attempt to avoid mass war rape. Which again, you can scoff at that, but mass war rape happened on this continent 70 years ago when the.
But God also said you could go and commit mass war rape. So if you're comparing God to like sinful heathens, then I don't understand.
Even if this was a liberalizing force, and even if this was not as bad as other slavery.
Now, one thing he did here that was really slippery, and I'm not sure how Alex is going to respond, we'll find out in a minute, but one thing he did that was really slippery is the argument isn't about whether or not it's time-bound. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it was just for a specific time. The problem, once again, is that your all-knowing, all-moral God, who Shapiro just quoted from Genesis, saying that he created all men in his image, all humans in his image, that God at the time said that it was okay to do something that is blatantly and well understood to be immoral.
Do you think this was not as bad as other slavery? Do you think that the ownership of other human beings under the conditions of the Hebrew Bible are immoral?
Yes.
So how do you account for God commanding something which you now see to be, or rather permitting something and explicitly and giving you details about how to do something which is proactively immoral?
Because he's not permitting me, permitting my great 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 great
To do something immoral.
to do something
Immoral.
that in the time was not considered immoral.
It wasn't considered immoral,
Right.
but was it immoral?
Eating shellfish wasn't considered immoral, and God said not to do it. What? And also, like, he's making the same argument. Well, he didn't say that I can do it. He said my grandfather could. LOL. Okay, so the God who you believe is infinite and has a consistent infinite character contradicted that character when it came to your great-great-great-grandfather.
It wasn't considered immoral,
Right.
but was it immoral?
By today's standards
who's
that
the
were
moral
developed by the
relativist?
Judeo-Christian tradition, sure. By today's standards developed under the Judeo-Christian tradition, immoral.
So
which, by the way, you're living off the you're again, not to get back to the Tom Holland argument, you're living off the remains of.
So Shapiro's changing the subject again. He is a weasel. We don't care if it wasn't considered immoral. God, I thought, doesn't conform to what society thinks is and is not immoral.
A moment ago, you say that the great success of religion is providing a sort of untouchable moral basis that sort of transcends human affairs and human debates. And now when I say, well, look at this, open your own religious scripture and look at this blatant immorality, you say, yeah, but, well, that was considered to be fine at the time. It's considered to be bad now by the progress of Judeo-Christian
there's a question
values. Who's the moral relativist here?
Well, it's not relativistic to say that a thing that is wrong today is considered wrong today because of a tradition that developed over time.
That's not what was being That's not what was relevant. When you say, is this immoral? Yes. Well, then why did God say it was okay to do something immoral? And you say, well, it wasn't considered immoral at the time. That is being you're making a relativist argument right there. Absolutely. You're saying that now morality is relative to society and what is and is not considered to be moral. Even if that's not deliberately what you're saying, when you respond to the criticism with that, you're using it as a caveat. You're using it as an argument.
Was it wrong?
It was wrong then to hold a slave. Yes, it was wrong then to hold a slave, obviously. And also, if you are God and you are pragmatically attempting to woo people.
Why does God need to pragmatically woo people to the other side? He didn't seem to be too interested in pragmatically wooing the Egyptians to let the Israelites go free from slavery when God mass murdered all the firstborn children that literally had nothing to do with anything.
God says, I think in chapter 21, maybe 22, says that if you have a Hebrew slave, you are to let them go after 7 years. If that Hebrew slave comes to you with a wife, then after the 7 years, you let them go too. If you give the Hebrew slave a wife and they have children, then after those 7 years are up, you give the man a choice. He can go after the 7 years, as per, but you keep his children and his wife.
Just like what I was saying.
And here the scripture says, if he says, I love my wife, I love my kids, and my master, as if that's going to be one of the principal considerations, then he can stay with you, at which point you take him outside, you pierce his ear like cattle, and he becomes your property for life. Now, here's a suggestion, for example. If it was already established that Hebrew slaves go after 7 years, and it's already established that if they come with a wife, they can go after 7 years, then if I give them a wife and they have children, would it not be, it doesn't seem to me particularly revolutionary. It doesn't seem to me the kind of thing that would have caused such social discohesion that God just couldn't have found a way to do it, to say, well, why not let the whole family go free after those 7 years? With the knowledge beforehand that if you give this...
Yeah, first of all, yeah. I mean, that's actually, I like the way that Alex is taking this, because rather than going the more extreme route, which probably would be the route I would take, which is just like, well, slavery is bad regardless, etc., he's kind of letting Ben lay the groundwork, and he's playing on his field. Why couldn't God do this practical thing? And I think that that's actually a really good point. God is literally a home wrecker. God, this premise here destroys families.
That seems to me, for example, a minor improvement that would not cause this kind of revolutionary earth-shifting, he couldn't have just gotten away with slavery. Maybe that's true. But something as obvious as this to me, it seems that if that is the case, that could have easily been done, then the failure to do so, and the keeping of that Hebrew wife and their children as the master's property, that itself becomes an immorality that is dictated.
If
from
I agree
the
with your
heavens.
premises, I agree with your conclusion. I think that the question as to how much social discohesion would it have caused to do a thing is an open question. I think the other question that sort of remains open here is the incentive structure as to whether you accept a wife from your master. Right, so I don't want to get into the abstruse. I mean, we can do this literally all day.
And step from the past into the future
there's 70
anyway,
volumes
so.
of the Talmud that are literally about this sort of stuff, and then copious writings in terms of reinterpretation.
Yeah,
of
we're
the
hardly
source.
the first people to talk about
Yeah,
this.
exactly.
Yeah.
This is not the first time these questions have come up. But I think the general point is sort of one where either we can dive into that full time and you can spend your life becoming a rabbi, which, enjoy.
Could happen.
You
Never say never.
have the beard for it. It's your beard is further along than mine. Or we can sort of stipulate at the top that there are certain biblical interpretations that are abstruse and difficult.
Yeah.
Dude, I've never heard someone, maybe other than a politician, be so good at not answering a f***ing question, at never actually contending with the argument. This clip is posted on Shapiro's channel, like I said. Who decides what is evil? Oh boy.
What for you makes an outcome good or bad? And feel free to break that down, define things as you want. And how do we determine what is good and acceptable in society?
Here is where I may disappoint you and potentially excite Mr. Shapiro in that I don't have a good answer to that question.
An outcome is good if it maximizes human well-being in some way or another, and an outcome is bad if it worsens human well-being in some way or another. That would be like a simple, basic starter answer, at least.
Obviously, attempts have been made for a long time to ground good outside of God. I must say that similarly to rehash the same theme, I think there are issues with grounding good in God as well. I don't think that removes the problem. I don't quite know what good is, if it indeed exists. I'm quite suspicious of the concept. I think it might be another one of these unfortunately quite nihilistic evolutionary...
Is the question whether or not good exists in like an objective sense? Or is the question whether or not we have a concept of good? And what is that concept? What does that concept look like?
Sort of illusions of a sort. I guess I ascribe to emotivism more than anything, which has sort of gone out of fashion in the past decade, but I think still has some truth to it in a sense. It's more of a philosophy of language than it is a philosophy of what good and bad actually is. What I do know, however, is that there are problems, I think, with trying to ground morality in the existence of a God, especially if it's done so on the grounds that it essentially can't be done anywhere else. I mean, the religions of the world are false. I think that they are incorrect. That is, I don't think there really is a supernatural authority. And what that means is that the inventions of religious morality are just those, inventions, and inventions of a human mind. Now,
exactly.
If you have a human morality that recognizes that it is essentially a series of compromise between the history of mankind trying to get along with each other on a planet, then what happens is sometimes these ideas and these philosophies rub up against the real world, and we can adapt them as necessary. Now, there is a deep problem with this, and that is, if I meet a man who wants to kill me, or a friend, and he says that he doesn't believe in God, there's very little I can do to talk him out of that, except I can threaten him with legal sanction, I can threaten him with moral reproach, exclusion from the moral community, but there's not much more I can do. However, if a person says that he wants to kill me, and he believes that he wants to kill me because God has told him to do so, then I don't even have that minimal reproach available to me. Because
this is actually completely true. In fact, there was a study done that found that people who believed that their violence was sanctioned by God, or that God sanctioned violence, were more likely to commit violence. Shocker, I know. But this is what we've seen over and over again. And it's absolutely true. If somebody believes that God has told them to commit this act, you're never going to be able to reason them out of it, because they think that God himself has told them to do it.
There is no law written by any man of any time that could ever count one iota against the dictates of the creator of the universe. Therefore, if that God in fact does not exist, and if these moralities are in fact human inventions, then what you have in the grounding of an ethical system in the dictates, allegedly, of the creator of the universe is all of the arbitrariness and subjectivity and failure and faults of nihilism and human invented morality, with all of the certainty and all of the faith and all of the unanswerability.
That's a really excellent way of phrasing this. Bravo, Alex.
That to me seems a dangerous cocktail that we drink at our peril.
So many things there, and so much that you're saying is quite brilliant. I actually thought you were going in a different direction with that last example, which I'll explain in a second. So, to start with the very beginning, obviously, the idea of right and wrong. So there are many problems with the motivism. Alistair McIntyre does a good job sort of breaking down the problems with the motivism. But the sort of idea that there have to be certain moral absolutes that are beyond contention, and those moral absolutes have to be universally accepted. You can ground that, I suppose, in a sort of descriptive universe. The problem is that, to go back to your example, which again I think is a really interesting one, if a man comes to kill me, I think the real question of religion versus non-religion in the utility sphere here is it more likely that a man is going to come to kill you being a devotee of a religion that says that he must kill you, or is it more likely that a man is going to kill you out of self-interest because he is not a devotee of a God who says that killing is wrong? So if you are faced with these two alternatives...
So that's a massive problem there. The only thing holding someone back from killing is that because God said not to? What Shapiro has done is, in his attempt to try and make the religion believer, I guess I'm trying not to say Christian because I know that Shapiro himself is not a Christian, but the God believer, okay, in his attempt to make that person look good, he's inadvertently admitted that the only thing holding this person back from killing to begin with is just this, well, God said not to, herder. Don't worry, bro, I've been really wanting to murder you, okay? But listen, I believe in God. You're safe, okay? Come on in the dark alley.
The question is why the man has come to kill you. I mean, that's your premise is the man has come to kill you because God told him to, and so he can't be dissuaded by force. Agreed. We see that full scale in the real world on a fairly regular basis. It is also true that over the course of human history, men have come to kill one another on the basis of self-interest in extraordinary amounts of the time. Tribal self-interest particularly, having no particular relationship with God, just the idea that I want to kill you over territory, I want to kill you over resources, I want to kill you because you're not a member of my immediate kin family, or because you killed a member of my kin family, and so in revenge I need to kill a member of your kin family. The entire, to borrow from your language, the entire sort of evolution of religion on a utility basis would have been to create moral absolutes that are applicable more broadly than to you and your friends. Any morality that can be created...
I can know that killing someone or murdering someone is wrong. I can know that because, for example, killing is not always wrong if I'm killing someone who's first trying to kill me, for example. If someone's attacking you and you kill them, that is absolutely permissible. So when we're talking about murder specifically, the unjustified act of killing another person, unjustified, you have an evolutionary explanation for this. Humans evolved to be social creatures. If we need to exist as social creatures, obviously unjustifiably murdering and just killing other members of your pack or society, however you want to word it in evolution terms, is obviously a detriment.
On an individual level is inherently dangerous because you can immediately graft that morality onto your personal self-interest. The entire purpose of religion, whether you want to ground that in evolutionary brain functionings or whether you want to ground that in revelation, the entire purpose of religion on a utility level is to remove morality from the purview of my special interest and to say, here are things that I cannot do, even if they are in my interest, because there is a higher power that says I cannot do these things. I think that a society that does not have...
Wouldn't it be better to know that I cannot do these things because by doing them that would result in a harm to another person and I have empathy, or that would result in a harm to another person and then a harm to me in return? The consequences for that is going to be bad. The psychological consequences for that is going to be a detriment. There are ways in which by acting out and doing things that maybe murdering somebody seems like it's in my immediate self-interest, in the long run, will have a severe detriment on your overall self-interest, on your overall individual self-preservation.
A society that refuses to say that there are certain absolutes that cannot be crossed under any circumstances that are universally applicable, it reduces things that we all take for granted, like equal justice before the law, like the idea that the law is supposed to equally apply to everybody, whether they're a member of your family or whether they're not. And there are broad...
That didn't come from religion.
The idea that the law is supposed to equally apply to everybody, whether they're a member of your family or whether they're not. And there are broad cultural differences in these questions. I mean, to pretend that all human societies have equality under law is obviously not true. It's not even remotely true, actually.
Yeah, and a lot of the places that don't have equality under the law are hyper-religious places. Oof, I know, that sucks.
There's a very good book called The Weirdest People in the World, all about the idea that we in the West have this sort of ethnocentric view of ourselves where we think everybody thinks like people in the West. But the truth is that because we are Western educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic, we have particular views of the world. Those views are drawn from a particularistic tradition. That particularistic tradition is biblical in nature. I mean, it is Judeo-Christian in nature, even if you're just describing European society or American society historically speaking. So the kind of removal.
So what it sounds like he's saying is that we have certain views of the world because we're in the Western region or whatever. And so that particular view is based heavily on tradition, and some of that tradition also comes from Judeo-Christian beliefs. So is it the Judeo-Christian beliefs or is it the tradition that's valuable?
Removal of God from the equation. Your suggestion is that God makes a person impervious to countervailing responses. And my answer is yes, God does make a person impervious to countervailing responses, including the evils of one's own heart, if you truly believe that God is standing above you, telling you,
God says, thou shalt not murder, and then God also commanded his people to murder babies.
And again, I'm not going to pretend that I think all religions are equivalent in their truth propositions, because I don't. I mean, if I did, I wouldn't be wearing a yarmulke, right? So that's just what it is. Inside religious communities, a lot of social bonds and a lot of social frameworks are built on the basis of this shared belief system. In other words, diversity itself, self-interest, cannot always check self-interest, and it tends to tear apart societies and communities unless there is an orienting goal. That orienting goal traditionally has been performed by church. It's been traditionally performed by the idea that you are serving God together. And because of that, people build these social bonds.
People can have an understanding. If you are self-motivated, if you just care about yourself, you can absolutely, based on your own self-interests, come to the conclusion that stealing and committing certain things that the Bible also says don't do is wrong and why it's wrong. You could come to those conclusions. If I commit theft and maybe I get away with it once and I keep doing it and I keep doing it, I know I'm not the only person committing theft. The more theft that's committed, the more likely prices are to go up. The more likely inflation is to grow. So in that case, that comes back to me and negatively impacts me. When inflation rises, that can increase poverty. When poverty rises, that can increase crime. When crime increases, now I'm really at risk. There are absolutely ways that you can reason for the betterment of just purely your own self-interest why you shouldn't do things. Absolutely. And mind you, I think that's far superior to have a reason and a logical explanation as to why I know this is bad, and not some, oh, I have like a fuzzy feeling that like God said it was bad, bruh? Okay, well, that was just a few clips of Ben Shapiro debating Alex O'Connor. And gotta say, Ben Shapiro did not do good at all. I don't know if I'm surprised or not, but he definitely did very poorly.